Hi there, welcome to another Broken Meeple video review, and this is Expedition to Newdale, one of two main releases by Alexander Pfister. I'll be reviewing both of them. It's this one and Maracaibo, so you'll be getting those in the very near future. This is the lighter of the two games being released. It is essentially a board game version of Oh My Goods. Oh My Goods is a little filler card game that he once produced, which was downright broken in its first edition, but is very quickly fixed, brought out into a second edition version, which I think the majority of people have got now, and it fixed it, and it actually is a pretty fun little filler game. I don't own it personally, and it's been a while since I've played it, but friends of mine have got it, and I enjoy it when it gets brought to the table. This is essentially taking it and putting a few more rules with it, a few more extra mechanics, and turning it into a scenario, story-based, in quotes, board game experience. With this one, you are essentially, I don't want to give too much away in the story aspect, but let's start with Chapter 1. You're setting off from a village and setting off into the wild. You need to get ration food, but the main thing you're doing is that you have these cards with either production buildings on them or special ability buildings. The special ones just trigger at the end of a round and they're worth points each. But the production buildings can be anything from a sawmill to an abattoir to a flour mill to a weaving mill, or everything's a mill, but an ore mine, that kind of thing. And you'll play these cards, and it's kind of worker placement. It's more action selection, really. You don't block each other. But what you do is with these pawns, you select some actions from building to getting more resources, to getting extra action points, etc., or unlocking special abilities that also cost money. And the primary crux of this is similar to Oh My Goods, although I'm not going to make too many comparisons to the card games. It has been a while since I've played it. But essentially, your production buildings are your bread and butter. You need money in order to build more buildings as you expand across this map board. But obviously you need money to do it, therefore you need to produce resources. You start off with a lowly little coal mine, but you can build other types of production buildings that give you resources that are better in worth. And the production is based on a bag of coloured meeples, where once you've all placed your action points and you think, right, I'm going to produce on this building and I'm going to try and do it sloppily, orderly, or extraordinarily, 3 odd words to pick, but basically rubbish, normal and good. And with those, you place your action points out, and then someone draws meeples from a bag in different colours, different distribution, so there's more yellow than there is blue, for example. And with these meeples, they consist of your labour market. And these are what you have available to use to produce on your cards. You don't spend them. You essentially produce as long as they're available. And if you want to produce sloppily, then you don't need as many. If you want to produce really well, then you need to obviously have more drawn out of the bag of the various colours as printed on the production building. If you're successful, you get cubes to represent the resources, and then you can spend those cubes as money to buy more buildings and various other things. Now, naturally, the better your production building, the more the thing is worth. I mean, it may only be each cube might only be worth 1 money a piece for a lowly bit of coal, but you then go up to baking bread and suddenly each one is worth 5. They get progressively more and more worth it. The black special buildings are just simply draw a card at the end of the round, have a fist for military victory at the end of the game, have a permanent labour person, like a meeple of a certain colour permanently for your production, that kind of thing. They're simple little bonuses, but there are other buildings that you can build. You churn through these cards pretty quickly, and after you've had a chance to produce and do your actions for a round, you get another chance to build or draw more cards, and then as you go through 7 rounds of the game, an event card is drawn which has some slight effect on the game in question. Now, obviously, at the end of the day, most victory points wins. Of course! But then once the game is done, you have choices, because you might have just played the first chapter on its own, and that's it. But with this one, it's 8 scenarios, or 8 chapters. You can play a standalone chapter, more on that later, but you could go from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2 to Chapter 3 to Chapter 4 and progress through the story. Now, what happens in each chapter is that there's slightly different setups, certain different cards will get introduced throughout the game, like little extra rules, sort of a bit like Charterstone, but not quite. You don't unwrap anything or anything like that. They're there, it's just they don't get introduced into the game until a certain later chapter. But also you'll have a different board. Each of the maps has got its own board with a unique map layout and different little actions that you might be able to do, different objectives, different little quirks. And you have a scenario booklet to go with it, and of course you can play the solo as well, which is a good little boost. Now, As you can see, it's definitely got a lot of similarities to Oh My Goods the card game. I'm not the biggest expert on that card game, but my friends who have been playing it are, and they claim that there's a lot of similarities between the two. But I'm looking at this in its own right. So, with the game itself, it started off on a pretty high note. You know, it's like, oh, I'm building up a cool little engine here. I'm going to get some cattle. Yep, get some cattle, buy some more buildings. You've got chain bonuses that you can use for the cards, so you spend cards out of your hand or use resources that you've got to basically produce more. But I had a pretty good engine going in my first game with like cattle in one bit and abattoir in the next, so I make all the cows and then turn them into meat, you know, like you do. But there's other things that you can do, there's other ways that you can combo, you might get various production cards to do with specific colour meeples so that you know exactly what you need, you might do a variety, it's up to you. But it's a nice little engine builder of, you know, doing like resource management, which is a mechanic I like. And 7 rounds goes very quickly. The game box says 90 minutes. That's pretty accurate, actually. I mean, 90 minutes, give or take maybe to 2 hours, but 2 hours if you've got 4 players and there's a little bit of AP or something. It shouldn't take any longer than 2 hours. 90 minutes for a 3-player game is kind of expected, and less obviously if you're playing solo or 2-player. But it's definitely kind of more in a mid-weight category. It certainly isn't light, but it's definitely not quite up to the levels of like the Mombasa, Great Western Trail, Maracaibo, like levels of weight. This is definitely nicely square in the middle. If you're a fan of the card game, you're probably going to get into this one quite quickly, because some of the rules are similar, but also the feel of it, you will get that similar feel here. But a few little issues. Firstly, the replay value. The replay value you would think is actually pretty good. You know, it's 8 scenarios and they've got different map boards, so every time it's a completely different game, right? Not quite. You know, playing through the story, it's a bit like a typical Euro narrative or something. It's this little thing happens and the board state is changed slightly, and that's about it. It's kind of like playing something like Downforce or, you know, like a racing game on a different map. Yeah, the map's different, it looks cool, but the crux of the game hasn't changed. You're still racing each other and blocking each other and playing cards. Here it's the same deal. Just because on one board, for example, you might be going through mountains, and another board you might go through forests, another one you might be sailing boats, for example, then it doesn't really change the game's mechanics at its core. You're still basically turning through those cards, putting the production buildings down, turning cubes into different cubes, even though they're all represented by the same brown cube, and, you know, going from there and building a little engine that lasts about 7 rounds. But you see a lot of these cards often. You go through that deck every single game. We haven't had a single game where that whole deck hasn't needed reshuffling. And when you see all these cards, a lot of them are quite samey. I mean, the production buildings aren't that much different from each other. They just cost a bit more and produce something that's better in value. But other than that, they function all the same. And even though there are different variations of things like sawmills and that, they are still a sawmill. Just because one sawmill costs $2 extra and requires blue meeples instead of red doesn't make it a quintessentially different card than another sawmill that maybe costs $2 less but requires more red and yellow because they're more common. And in any case, you really want the ones that require more common meeples, really. If you're buying a ton of stuff that relies on blue, you're going to have trouble here unless you've got some of those black buildings that give you blue meeples permanently or something, because blue is very rare in the box and you shouldn't rely on it getting it in quantity. But, you know, that's down to you and playing the game. But the scenarios just didn't feel that much different. They introduced a couple of quirks. The map layout is a little bit different. Like, okay, some maps require you to have unlocked an ability or pay extra money to go down certain routes. That's cool, it's neat. But it still doesn't really change up much. You know, you put the production buildings down, you make cubes, and then you build more cards, which allows you to put a little Monopoly house on the map and claim VPs. You know, it's just very dry. This is not a thematic game in that kind of sense. Yes, okay, you've got a story narrative, but it's a pretty bare bones basic story narrative here. We are not talking, you know, phenomenal writing here. We're not talking a novel, an interesting plot. Oh, I would never see that coming type thing. No, this is your atypical Euro game plot, which it fills a blank, and that's about it. It's like the campaign mode in a multiplayer shooter. You play it for the multiplayer shooter. The campaign is almost kind of tacked on. You know, it's like a 4-hour thing, and you just go, oh, yeah, that was alright, but not that fussed about it. Right, let's get into the multiplayer. It's very much like that. You can jump into a scenario off the bat, though. I have done this. You know, we attempted to jump into chapter 7, you know, before we'd even seen the other chapters at one point. We just wanted to see how easy it was to just go, you know what, I want to jump into this chapter and see what goes on. It can be done, but not only do you have to learn the rules of a specific chapter, you then have to introduce cards to the deck that you haven't seen before. And that means referring to them in the back of the book and a lot of rules checking, and as much as you can do that, I don't recommend you do. Even though I would probably argue that the best game is probably the 7th and 8th scenario, because all the stuff's in the game and you get to use the flip side of your board and everything. So, you know, you want to play the 7th and 8th chapter more often than you want to play the earlier ones because there's more in them. But if you're learning the game and you want to get to grips with the cards and do it slowly, then just play through the chapters one by one, tells you what to do, tells you which bits stay in each game, and the setup is not too difficult, to be honest. I mean, as long as you keep the numbered cards separately from all the other cards, apart from just having to find them at the end, which is a bit of a pain, you know, it's pretty easy to just go, right, here's a bucket load of cards, shuffle them, right, dung, deal out 8, here's the board, here's your player board, few cubes, coal mine, done. You know, it's a relatively quick setup and not that long of a takedown. You know, you've just got to separate those number cards from the big deck and it gets done pretty quickly. Does 1 to 4 players, works fine at all player counts really, it just takes a bit longer with more players. Although, I'd argue that you just don't really need more players, because literally, you don't block each other in this game. So, there's no worker placement, it's action selection, a bit like Lowlands and things like that. So, it doesn't really matter if the other players are there. Not to a great extent. You're building on this map together, yes, but the most that will do is a player might go to a spot you wanted to go to and take your bonus tile, which you can get if you build slowly. Or they might go to a spot and get the 2 victory point first building bonus on that space. That's about it though. Whether they build at the same time as you, or grab their 3rd action pawn before you do, or, you know, build this particular building before you do, that's pretty much it. A couple of cards in the future introduce a minor bit of take that interaction, but other than that, it is so minimal at best that really, this is not really worth having 4 players there. So okay, you think, alright, well I'm going to play this maybe 2 player only, or solo mode. And of course, the game plays fine at those counts, and I would say it's probably more fun to play solo solo and 2 player than it is 3 and 4 player, because you just don't need the other players there.
This is why Superman works alone.
There's not a huge amount of downtime because you've got the first couple of rounds can be done simultaneously, and then certain other bits can also be done simultaneously unless someone insists, but the turn order is not too bad when you're resolving each action pawn because production is pretty straightforward. You know, the chaining bonus rules are a little bit fiddly to grasp at first, but once you get them down, it's like, oh yeah, I produce these and I put down 8 yellow cards in my hand and suddenly I get like another 9 cubes on my thing because you get a bonus. And production is relatively straightforward, and then building and doing the other various actions on the board, again, is not very complicated. So downtime is kept to a minimum, which is a good thing. So it is fun to play, and certainly at first I was getting into it. It's like, yeah, you could build a little engine, I get enough time to build my engine, and that's cool, although 7 rounds, it does go a bit quickly. I mean, it's not like you're going to build up this huge factory of engines. No, it's just basically, right, I need a couple of buildings going now. Like, get them now, don't wait, you need them now. And even grabbing your 4th action pawn probably isn't that worth it in the long run unless you focus on it early, and even then, if you've done that, you're not producing anything. So you'll probably end up with your 3rd action pawn, but again, your 4th, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it a lot of the time. You know, you really want some solid production engine going in order to get cubes and spend money and get more cards. But it's just feeling very dry after, you know, even after as many games as I've played, I feel myself not wanting to necessarily go back to it. People that I've played it with, who have played this and the card game like in decent amount of times, prefer the card game. And the card game is half the length of this. It's a 45-minute game, this is a 90-minute game. But this gives you pretty much the same feel as the card game, it just throws some extra mechanics on. And some of the extra mechanics in this are just questionable. I mean, there's secret objectives that you can do, right? And this is a prime example where I swear some of this stuff is either tacked on at the end or it's just thrown in to appease to Eurogamers. But the secret objectives that you do. Some of the villages have got little banners above them, different shapes and symbols on them. And there's a few mystic stones on some of the far away places. And the idea is that you get a secret objective card. The bottom is exactly the same for all players, 2 points for every mystic stone you build on. And the top bit is literally 2 points for building on a particular shape or symbol banner. That's it. That's all the secret objectives are. And every single time, players will either be at the same amount of points on each, or maybe 2 points difference on them. They are beyond pointless.
Well, that was pointless.
There is no reason to have them in the game. I mean, literally, we got to a point where we just said, you know what, I can't even be bothered to have it face down as a secret objective. I'm just going to have it face up because you can tell where I'm going anyway. You see where I'm building, and the second part of the objective is exactly the same. So we just get to the point of saying, well, okay, we're not even going to bother with the first half of the secret objective, just ignore it. Anyway, you've got to have points for the Mystic Stones, because otherwise why would you go and build that far? But other than that, the secret objectives are just completely pointless. There's no point in having them. Why? I don't get it. And there's just little things like that. I mean, there's the fists I mentioned, the military victory. You get 4 points for having the most at the end, then 2, then 1 for a second, third. They come into play a little bit better in later scenarios when the story bit evolves. But for the most part, they are just literally grab the most fists and get a few points. Not even that many points, just like 2. You'll get 4, somebody else will get 2, so it's a 2-point differential. You will commonly finish, if you're first and second, around 75, 60 to 75 points. 2 points is not a huge deal, to be honest, and all the effort that it goes into the fact that, oh, I need this fist, therefore get it. It doesn't do anything else in the game. You don't use it to take out people or better your position. It's just literally, you built this, it's worth a fist. There you go. A few extra points at the end. It just feels so tacked on and unnecessary. You could have taken the fist thing out entirely. You could have removed the secret objectives entirely and just left the game like that. And pretty much it would feel exactly the same, with no difference whatsoever. Another problem with this game that I have noticed is the incredible luck factor that it has. Bear in mind, you're drawing tons of cards from a deck. Well, tons. It depends what engine you've got. Sometimes you might be short on cards, but there's ways to draw a lot more cards. And if you've got a particular engine going with some of the black buildings or some of the special effects that turn off, you could draw a lot of cards. But it's still luck of the draw. You don't get to draft any, there's no face-up display apart from a few that pop out every game, and that's literally it, like 6 cards out of a deck of this big. Hardly that worth it. But you're drawing from the deck, and you might draw a bunch of expensive buildings where you can't do much with them. So you've got to waste an action to go exchange them with the deck in order to try and get cheaper buildings so you can actually start an engine going. And then on top of that, the chain bonuses. 2 of them require resources to be on your cards and you exchange them into cubes. That's fine. You've already got them on the table. But the key way you will chain is by playing a card from your hand with the same symbol in the left as the one that's on the right of a particular production building. So you might have drawn 8 cards hoping to draw the green wood symbol and draw 1. 1 green out of all those 8. So you get to produce, but then you're left with a bunch of cards in your hand that aren't that useful. But then your opponent sitting over there draws the same number of cards, wants yellow, and draws 6 yellow. Regardless of how well you shuffle the deck, it's going to happen. So then he comes out and goes, right, I'm going to make a cattle market and I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yellows in, gets the bonus as well, and suddenly he's made like 8 barrels that are worth 3 each or something and has a bucket load of cash, on top of production. So probably about 10, 11 barrels that are worth lots. And you've barely made a few cattle that's worth a pittance comparison. So he gets further, but you suffer. And it's definitely noticeable that this is one of those games where there's a bit of a rich get richer mechanic to it. If someone starts off bad, they finish bad. They don't suddenly catch up. There's not enough time with 7 rounds. But if you're doing well, then you go past victory point markers that give you more cards so you can keep the momentum going. If you don't pass them quick enough, then, well, you're not getting as many cards as the winning player. But then also, if that person is producing reliably lots of money, then they get to buy better stuff, and they get to get more points, and they get to basically make themselves richer. Whereas the other person going slower doesn't really have a hope in hell of catching up. So you know, definitely a bit too much luck for my liking for something that is a 90 minute to 2 hour game. It's, you know, somebody might just get exactly the hand they want at the right time, and boom, they're going to skyrocket. You could argue that maybe the person in last place gets a bit of that luck every now and again, but it just won't measure up to if the winning player or players, you know, end up getting stuff that they want. It will just snowball into, you know, rich get richer, and it tends to put a bit of a sour note on anybody who's losing the game at the time. And again, you have the card game. If you asked me, I'd sooner say let's play Oh My Goods. I prefer the card game to this board game. So why do you need this? Component quality wise, it's pretty much average as well. I mean, it's lookout games, you get some wooden pieces, you get a bag and, you know, some nice little meeples, but other than that, the artwork is pretty much the same as in every other thing like Caverna and that. It's okay, but it doesn't really sing to me that much. And there's nothing really to shout about as, oh, that's awesome. You know, apart from the fact that you've got 8 scenarios. But again, the scenarios just don't feel that different. It's not... I couldn't see myself playing through the campaign other than for obviously getting it reviewed. You know, I asked friends, you know, if I was to sit you down for a weekend and we said we're going to binge through 8 games of this, none of them really felt up to it. You know, they felt maybe they would do the campaign, but they would probably play it like once in a blue moon and then over time. And even then, they weren't even that keen. They were more just like, you know what, I'd just rather play 1 or 2 of the good scenarios every now and again. But it's just not measuring up to the competition. And I feel this one is going to get forgotten very quickly, despite the fact it has Alexander's name on the box, which typically means it's the new hotness whenever it comes out. You know, so, you know, I like it fine, but sadly, it's not interesting enough to keep it coming out for more plays. That's what's hurting it. I started off thinking this was a solid 7 or 8 when I first played at Essen, and then since then it's just dropped, and now I just don't feel like playing it anymore. You know, not a bad game by any means, but I just don't think it measures up to the stiff competition that we have, you know, with thousands and thousands of games coming out. You know, this for me, at best, is just going to get a 5 out of 10. You know, if you're a fan of Oh My Goods, I think you'll get some fun out of it. You know, if you're a fan of this style of Euro, like engine building and Alexander Pfister's style, I think you'll get a kick out of it as well. But again, I don't think it's going to stand the test of time. And I think for a lot of people, you'll play it, enjoy it a few times, and then probably move on to one of his other games. You know, I mean, you know, spoiler alert, I think Maracaibo's a better game, you know, but I think most of you are going to think, well, you know, I prefer Isle of Skye, or I prefer Great Western Trail, or Mombasa. I think you're going to like those games more than this one. I just don't see it standing out in the crowd. So that's it for me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video, and whether you agree or disagree, it's still only a game. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video.